I'm live, calixboxing.com, calixboxing 2.0 here on Twitter, on YouTube, I'm sorry. And make sure to hit that sub button and the alert, and make sure to like the video as well. Also go over to Twitter, calixboxing2, and hit that follow button on Twitter. Appreciate all the support I'm getting and all the archive views I'm getting. I definitely appreciate that. Archive views have been great. Tonight, under the weather still, but tonight I wanted to get on here and briefly talk about, as long as I have my voice tonight, Undisputed. Is it overrated? Is it overvalued by boxing fans? Um, is it sustainable? Like, is it something that let's take some examples in boxing. And right now we have two undisputed champions. We have Canelo Alvarez at 168, Devin Haney at 135. We had Josh Taylor at 140. He just vacated. What did he vacate? The WBA. So the WBA vacant at 140. I think there's two vacant belts in boxing right now, and one WBA at 140 is one of them. There's another one in a lower weight class. I believe 112. Is it? What's the other vacant belt is at? I got my papers all out here. The other vacant belts at IBF at 108. So two vacant belts right now. In another video tomorrow, going in deep on the belts and the whole picture as far as the real belts in boxing, and also on betting. I'm going to drop an educational video, betting 101, tomorrow as well, just to give people an idea of betting and terminology. I think people really need to figure out the terminology of betting, because when I throw out these odds, minus 130, plus 120, people don't understand what I'm saying. I finally realized that. So not everybody knows betting terminology. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about trap bets and all that stuff. So look for that video tomorrow. But tonight it's Undisputed. And the reason I'm asking, is Undisputed overrated? Because when we see a guy become undisputed, he's cleaning out his division. He has every belt that matters in his trophy case. But at the same time, let's look at 135. Devin Haney becomes undisputed at 135. He owns all the belts that matter. But Showtime can promote Tank Davis as a 135-pound champion at the same time. So it devalues what Devin Haney is doing at 135. Devin Haney accomplished something great in boxing. Not too many people have done it in the four-belt era. So for Showtime to go and promote a Tank Davis as a champion at 135, it spits in the face of what Devin Haney has done. And on top of that, look at Canelo Alvarez at 168. David Benavidez is calling himself a champion, and Showtime is promoting him as a champion as well, or the PBC is. So it devalues what these guys are doing as undisputed champions. But also, when these guys become undisputed champions, I start to hear things like, oh, Canelo beat, a bunch of Euro bums to become undisputed, so it's not a big deal. Or Jermell Charlo, yeah, he's undisputed at 154, but is he really a pound for pound champ? To me, if you become the undisputed champion of the world in your weight class, you're automatically it should be your default position to put that guy in the top 10 pound for pound, in my opinion, because it's a career achievement. And I think that guy belongs in the top 10, at least for the time being, until somebody else puts on a great performance to kick that guy out to become undisputed. But it just seems to me like people are starting to look past the undisputed achievement, right? And then you throw on top of that, and shout out to my guy Remy in the building. Appreciate this. Greetings, my guy Calix. Appreciate that, Remy. Technically undisputed means you're fighting and beating champions, the top. Isn't that what the sport is about? Being the top and best. Anyone that devalues that doesn't see boxing as a true sport. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you have four major sanctioning bodies: WBO, WBA, WBC, IBF. That's what we've deemed the sanctioning bodies. The other ones, we don't view them as real belts, real sanctioning bodies. Those are just secondaries, right? What makes it even more crowded. And the sanctioning bodies sort of devalue themselves by doing this. Is they grant regular champions, silver champions, all these meaningless JV belts just to promote certain fighters as champions, and promote themselves in these other fights. But on top of that, to get sanctioning fees, right? They're getting more sanctioning fees from a Tank Davis, from a David Benavidez for these secondary JV trinkets. But it devalues what the real champions are doing in these weight classes. It devalues what Devin Haney has done if these other guys are running around there, calling themselves champions. And of course, those guys are going to do that. But when you see networks promoting these guys as champions, and you're seeing promoters of guys who are undisputed champions going on the side and then calling other fighters in the same weight class champions, it devalues what the undisputed guy has done. And it clouds the picture. And it's frustrating to watch as a boxing fan. But the other part of this is the unsustainability of Undisputed. When a guy becomes undisputed, most of the time they just talk about moving up a weight class, right? Terrence Crawford becomes undisputed at 140, moves up to 147. Canelo Alvarez becomes undisputed at 168, starts talking about moving up to 175. As soon as Devin Haney, he's going to stick around at 135, but he was starting to talk about moving up to 140. Josh Taylor, 140, he was starting to talk about moving up to 147. And had he won against Jack Catterall in that fight clearly, I think he would have moved up to 147 already. But Josh Taylor is talking about sticking around at 140 now for a Jack Catterall fight in the future. More on that in a minute. Haney lucked out and pulled the Jermaine Taylor, got them all in one fight. LOL. And this is another thing about this is I'm glad you brought this up when I'm talking about the sustainability of this. I'd like to see guys stick around when they become undisputed and defend all 4 belts simultaneously. But this is why I bring up the sustainability part. The sanctioning bodies make it unsustainable to defend all 4 belts simultaneously due to the oppressive sanctioning body fees. Josh Taylor said the reason he couldn't defend 4 belts at once is because he was paying 11 to 12% of his total purse to sanctioning fees. You can't do that. Like, why would you give up 11, 12% of your purse to sanctioning fees? It's unsustainable to defend all 4 belts at the same time once you get them. Once you get your hands on all this hardware, and I know guys can negotiate better sanctioning fees, a better percentage, and I'm sure Canelo has done that, right? And Canelo's about to defend all 4 of his belts against Golovkin. But there's a reason that these guys are not doing this in their career once they get all 4 belts, because it's just unsustainable to do it with mandatories. All 4 sanctioning bodies have their mandatories that you have to honor within a given period, be 12 months, 18 months. And on top of that, the sanctioning fees, which I mentioned, that's the bigger part of it. So you want to go into a bigger fight, say, but you have to honor a mandatory that was given to you within 12 to 18 months. And you have to do this for all 4 sanctioning bodies. It's a tough thing to do. It's just unsustainable to do over time. So when you bring up Jermaine Taylor is the only fighter to become undisputed by beating the undisputed champion. What I would like to see is more of that. I would like to see a guy like Bernard Hopkins did it. Bernard Hopkins wins all 4 belts. He defends all 4 belts. Jermaine Taylor beats him, and he gets all 4 belts. But I don't think Jermaine Taylor, after that, defended all 4 belts. I think like Josh Taylor, he defended maybe 3, maybe 2, but he dropped some belts in order to fight bigger fights like a Winky Wright. So this is what happens. Once you get it, it's a tough enough thing to get. It's a great achievement, but to defend it once you get it is even more difficult because they put up so many obstacles in your way in order to defend it. You really have no control over your career once you get all 4 belts if you're going to defend all 4 belts simultaneously. So what I would like to see is I like Canelo defending all 4 belts against Triple G. I liked Josh Taylor sticking around at 140, defending all 4 against Jack Catterall. I would like to see Devin Haney stick around at 135 and defend all 4 belts each fight. Defend them all against Kambosos in a rematch. Defend them against Lomachenko next year. I would like to see guys doing this, but at the same time, I do not blame them if they don't, because too many obstacles are in their way. Josh Taylor already vacated, what did I say earlier, the WBA? He already vacated the WBA. He doesn't want to pay the sanctioning fees. He doesn't want to honor the mandatory. He wants to go fight Zepeda, and what a beautiful fight that is. And I can't blame him one bit for dropping a belt if he can't go fight Zepeda, or if he's paying 11 to 12% in sanctioning fees. How could you blame that guy for dropping a strap? I don't. So I want to see it more sustainable in order to defend all these belts at the same time. And I think if we do that, this whole thing would be more meaningful. We would continue to carry on a tradition of having a champion in each weight class, and that's what we need. I'm not against 4 sanctioning bodies. There's a reason we have 4 sanctioning bodies. 68 belts across 17 divisions. And if you look at it, 16 countries are represented. If you're looking at just major belt holders, 16 countries represented within those belt holders. I think it's like 43 champions total, holding 68 belts with 2 vacant, so 66 belts. And there's a reason they do this. There's a reason that we have 4 sanctioning bodies. You have different parts of the world represented within these 4 sanctioning bodies, right? And then you have 4 different ranking systems when they work, which they don't often work, but in theory, it's the right thing to do to give guys a shot at titles, mandatories, who deserve mandatory shots, but aren't given it because they don't have big names, i.e. Ndongo getting a shot at Terrence Crawford for Undisputed in Nebraska. Ndongo goes to, I believe, Russia, then he goes to UK, consolidates belts, wins belts, and then he leverages himself into an undisputed shot at Crawford. Had the mandatory process not been there, he would have never gotten that shot. So when the mandatory process in this 4-belt system, when it works, it's good. The blueprint is beautiful. But the problem is everything that involves an alphabet, it seems. It always starts off with good intentions until it's hijacked. Until it's hijacked by greed and by corrupt people. And that's what we've gotten with the sanctioning bodies. And they break it, and then it goes from a beautiful thing to a messed up system. We need to get back to the basics. We need to get rid of the Reggie belts. I hear people talk about this all the time. Oh, the reason he has the regular belt, the reason he's keeping the regular belt is that he's first in line for a shot at the real champion. No. That's what the mandatory process is for. The reason the Reggie belt is there is for the sanctioning body to collect more fees, right? And I throw out Tank Davis because it's the easiest and best example to use in this process right now for everybody to understand. Tank has a Reggie belt, the regular belt. The reason that Tank is fighting and keeping that regular belt is it works for him because he can call himself a 3-division champion, a current lightweight champion. The reason it works for the sanctioning body is they can collect sanctioning fees from Tank. And, oh, by the way, in a big pay-per-view fight on Showtime, their name can be put out there, promoted. But the problem is they're devaluing the real belt that they're giving Devin Haney in the process, because Devin Haney is undisputed. That means it's not disputable. He is the champion. Nobody else can call themselves a champion. So it clouds the whole process. But it's greed. It's greed. That's what messes up this whole system. If we had a 4-belt system that worked, rankings that are not corrupt, not money being put under the table to get your fighter climbing up the rankings, a little higher in the rankings. If you want to look at If you want to look at an example of the rankings not working, how is it that Jack Catterall loses to Josh Taylor, loses, but really wins? Everybody with eyes sees he wins that fight. And then when Josh Taylor was talking about vacating all those belts and moving up to 147, Jack Catterall's name was not going to be anywhere in the top 2 in any of those rankings. And you're talking about 8 different fighters, and Jack Catterall's name was not going to be there in order to fight for any of those vacant belts. And this is what I'm talking about, the corruption in boxing. It's not good. But it's greed that gets in the way, right? It's greed that gets in the way. If it wasn't for fighters looking for an easy road, there would be no Reggie belts. If it wasn't for sanctioning bodies looking for more sanctioning fees, there would be no Reggie belts. There would be 1 belt for each sanctioning body in each division. 4 belts per division. WBA, WBO, WBC, IBF. 4 belts. And then you would have the mandatory underneath these, mandatory challenger underneath these. 1, he's a mandatory challenger. And then underneath that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the rankings. Top 10 in each rankings in each sanctioning body. If this was a good system set up, so this is how the system was supposed to be set up, then it would work. And we use that blueprint as a map. And then when the mandatory process works, we'd have 4, say you have 4 champions in each division, then those champions start fighting each other and unifying. And then once you get 1 fight away from undisputed, then you fight for the undisputed championship of the world. But this is what I'm talking about as far as maybe we're overvaluing undisputed. And another reason I bring that up is if undisputed really mattered as much as boxing fans said it did, we'd be ranking these fighters higher. 1, but also these fighters, when they got 1 fight away from undisputed, they'd be fighting that undisputed fight. Look at how many divisions we have where we're 1 fight away from undisputed. Heavyweight, Usyk versus Fury. We're not getting that fight. Beterbiev versus Bivol. Are we getting that fight next? Doesn't look like it. I mean, we're 147. That's another one. We're 1 fight away from undisputed at 147. Will we get Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford? We'll see. But we're 1 fight away in multiple divisions. And if undisputed really was the end all be all, if it was valued that high as 1 champion in each division, and that's so meaningful, then I think we'd have these fights already. We would have gotten them already. We would have gotten Fury versus Usyk already. And more on that real quick. Rematch clauses. That's another thing that gets in the way of undisputed fights. All these obstacles put in the way. I talked about the mandatory process, the politics, right? Bivol versus Beterbiev. Now, we're 1 fight away from undisputed, and Bob Arum is saying we can't fight Bivol because he's over there on the dead zone, and nobody knows who Bivol is. More people just watch Bivol than just watch Beterbiev. Make the fight. Do a cross promotion, make the fight. Don't disparage the other network. Don't disparage the app, Dead Zone, just because you want to keep the fight in-house. But also rematch clauses. It's another obstacle. Not Bob Arum. We had Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder in the second fight. And we could have gotten Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua at that time. Huge fight. Arguably the biggest fight that could be made in boxing universally. And what happens? Rematch clause. And then it goes into litigation, and it drags on and it drags on. And a judge has to see that, yes, the rematch clause must be exercised. So instead of getting Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua for undisputed, we get Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder. A much smaller fight universally. A good fight, it was, but much smaller fight universally than Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua, which would have been for all the marbles. So what happens then? Tyson Fury gets past Deontay Wilder in the third fight, and then we get Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk, and then Alexander Usyk schools Anthony Joshua, and then what happens? Rematch clause. Automatic rematch clause, immediate. So instead of getting Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk for all the marbles, what do we get? Tyson Fury versus Dillian White. And then we get Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua too. We just can never get to the point. We can never get to the point. So if the mandatory process, rematch clauses, politics, if all of this gets in the way of Undisputed and takes precedent over Undisputed, how big is Undisputed really? Boxing fans scream for the best, fighting the best, but find a way to complain about it. Shaking my head, and I am also shaking my head. Shout out to my guy G Funky in the building. Let's see what we got. Let me scroll. I missed a bunch of comments. I didn't want to lose my train of thought. It takes some kind of risk to become undisputed. It's crazy. We got so many in recent years after having hardly any. And that's the thing that I like about what's going on right now is more fighters are using the four. I think Canelo started a wave with that. When people saw Canelo run through 168, I think more guys, undisputed unifications became more of a thing. The past year, we haven't talked about undisputed and unifications. Like I was on the YTBC from 2010 all the way to 2020, off and on, and we never talked about unifications to undisputed as much as we talked about them in 2021 and 2022. It's become a thing. And I'm glad that more people are using that four belt system in order to make unification fights, undisputed fights, because it's a good thing to have a champion in the division. And I just wish it was more sustainable once guys become the undisputed champion to defend the undisputed championship. Good comment. Which is better, Pacquiao being a lineal champ at 135 in 2007 or Canelo being undisputed at 168 in 2001? I think the fights that Pacquiao had to go through obviously were tougher and are more meaningful, but the achievement of 168 of becoming undisputed is also great. But I think had the politics not gotten away, Pacquiao could have been a multi-division undisputed champion. Had that been a thing back then, because nobody was really targeting that. And that's one of the things also that makes me wonder if undisputed is big as we're making it out to be, because for years, guys just weren't going for it. It just wasn't a thing that people were talking about like it is now. So it depends on the fighters. Not all undisputed runs are the same. Haney had one of the easier ones. Jermell Charlo had one of the tougher ones. Jermaine Taylor beating Bernard Hopkins to become the only fighter to become undisputed by beating the undisputed and doing it in his first. He was only a four-year pro at the time. And then rematching Bernard Hopkins and beating him again, and then fighting Winky right after that. That was impressive as well. So it all depends. Those fees are borderline extortion. Yeah, I told my brother about the fees. They got to pay for the belts. He couldn't believe it. A lot of things you tell non-boxing fans, they just can't believe. Does the ring lineal title have sanctioning fees too? I don't believe. And that's the lineal. And one thing people get wrong about that too is the Ring Magazine title is only on the line when number one and number two in the division face each other. That's it. When it comes to Ring Magazine rankings, when the Ring Magazine number one and Ring Magazine number two in the weight class fight each other, then the Ring Magazine belt is on the line. Crazy to say boxing legacy has a price, not your physical health, but also a ridiculous financial price. Taylor rematch Hopkins to defend them, I think. Yes. And then he didn't defend all 4 of them against Winky Wright. My cousin was talking about Tank Raleigh as a super fight of the year. Kambosos Haney was meaningless. I literally told them to get out and don't come back with that nonsense. What about the regular and interim belts? And that's what I'm talking about. The Reggie belts, JV trinkets, as I call them, they're insane. Unless you're racking up multi-millions and drawing in your draw, sometimes Undisputed doesn't make financial sense. It's true as well. That's another obstacle in the way. I like Undisputed when it motivates big fights being made. 168 being held hostage by PBC, though, and we've talked about that. PBC is holding 168 hostage, and that's the thing. Like what you just said. A lot of people would have rather seen Canelo fight David Benavidez than, say, Caleb Plant, even though David Benavidez didn't have the belt. Right? And nobody can blame Canelo for fighting Caleb Plant and going for the belt undisputed. I would have done the same thing. And it was a big achievement. But sometimes the bigger fight is not the undisputed fight. And it also calls into question whether we're overvaluing undisputed. Why these fighters got to do more than show up and fight these days and get their money elsewhere and work outside the ring. True. It's true. I prefer a mandatory by fight for the belt in question. Not all 4. Devin Haney is taking on the Hopkins role. He needs all the belts to make any big fights at 135. That's true. Like if a guy like Devin Haney drops any of those belts, being that he doesn't have a big fan base, like Canelo can drop all 4 of those belts really at 168, and everybody at 168 would still come to him, right? He doesn't need those belts anymore, which makes me wonder why he's even defending them. At a point, I've said this about Floyd, I've said this about Manny, they're bigger than the belts. Unless you're doing it for some achievement, right? Unless you're Canelo moving up to 175, why hold on to belts? I said it about Pacquiao for years. Why hold on to belts at 147? Same thing with Floyd. Why hold on to belts at 147 and pay sanctioning fees when you don't have to? You're bigger than those belts at that point. Devin Haney is not at this point. Devin Haney drops any of those 4 belts, he starts to lose leverage. Josh Taylor has lost leverage at 140 by dropping one of those belts. I don't think Josh Taylor is that big of a name to where he can drop these belts and still have the leverage that he would have had he still been undisputed and defended all 4 belts at once. I think his stock dropped after the Jack Catterall fight. And he's saying that he's sticking around at 140 to fight Jack Catterall. Then why isn't he fighting Jack Catterall? And don't get me wrong. I love that Zabeta fight. I like it better than the Catterall rematch. But he's saying, I'm sticking around at 140 just to fight Jack Catterall. I got to shut him up. Then why not just fight him now? I think Jack Catterall is a stylistic nightmare. I think he's cagey. I think he's a frustrating guy to fight. And I actually think that the Zapata fight is better for Josh Taylor at this point. It's more fan-friendly, more entertaining, and it's a style that's better for Josh Taylor. It fits him better. And it's a better fight for us as boxing fans. Like the college football transition from the mythical national title to the BCF to the playoff system, boxing won't change unless the new system makes the powers more money than the old system. Yep. Good. Greed messes up every sport. 180 games in baseball and 82 in NBA. Way too many. That's right. That's right. And then they put it on the purists. They say the purists would not like it if the baseball season was dropped from 162 to, say, 100. They put it on the purists, but really it's them. I don't know too many purists that watch 162 games. I don't know too many purists who watch 82 NBA games throughout the season. Why not drop it to 60? And like you said, money. They need to replace those belts with just medals, no fees, and have that medal be like your ticket to fight for the belt. I'm telling you, man, like what they're going to do is they're going to continue to talk out both sides of their mouth. They're going to continue to say, we're going to consolidate these belts. We're going to drop the amount of belts that we have. And they're not. They're not. They may do it for a time being, and then it's going to ramp back up. They're just not going to do it. There's too much money involved. There's too much money involved. There's too much greed. There's no checks and balances. And they're going to continue in the same process. But if they did, if they dropped all of those regular belts, all those Reggie belts, and just stuck to one belt per division, per sanctioning body, it would be a beautiful thing. And if the rankings actually made sense, this sport would take off like you would not believe. And that's the frustrating thing about it is, and I'm telling you what happens. They get paid under the table by fighters' handlers in order to climb them up the rankings. It's a corrupt system. And they take money under the table. It's all short-term, short-sighted stuff. If they did this by the book, one belt per division, the rankings make sense. Mandatory process makes sense. Make it sustainable for a champion, an undisputed champion, to defend that belt over time, over a long period of time, over a long stretch, have one champion per division. Because that's what would happen, right? Unless a guy vacated and moved up, retired, something like that, you would continue to have one champion per division because you'd be defending all four belts. So the guy who beats you ends up getting all four belts. And I'm sure there would be, like I said, retirements, guys moving up, where you would have these belts get vacated, right? But if you did this, this sport would take off like you wouldn't believe. Like you wouldn't believe. Because I say it, even after great fights comes confusion to the casual fan. Even after I watch a great fight with a casual fan, they're like, wait, how many belts were there involved? Why is there other champions in the sport? Why are they saying that guy's undisputed when he's not undisputed because they're calling that guy champion? It's too much confusion. We live in the Kardashians world. It's all low vibrational stuff. People want what's simple. You have to simplify everything. You have to make the complex simple. And that's what I'm trying to do on my website by showing everybody the real champions per weight class, how many champions per country, and just showing how this four-belt system is supposed to work, where universally you have multiple countries involved, multiple countries being represented within these different sanctioning bodies. It's a beautiful thing when it works, but there's just too much corruption involved. The only way a four-belt undisputed championship would work is for the bodies to have one agreed upon mandatory challenger and remove the 12% combined cut on the purse. Not going to happen. And Lee Groves hits it on the head better than I could right there. They're not going to give up all that money. They're not going to give up 3% sanctioning fees. And like I said, certain guys can negotiate down those sanctioning fees. Certain guys cannot. And it would be great if all parties involved work towards this is going to be the mandatory here and we can hold off on this one. But look at what's going on with Jermell Charlo right now. Jermell Charlo wants to stick around at 154. And I forgot to mention him as the undisputed champion 154 earlier. So actually 3 undisputed champions in boxing. But he wants to stick around at 154, which is a beautiful thing. I was just talking about this. I want to see guys become undisputed and stick around in the weight class that they became undisputed in and defend all 4 belts. And Jermell wants to do that against a top 4 guy in Tim Tszyu in the division in a dangerous fight, a young lion. And then instead of this, you have beef between 2 sanctioning bodies in that weight class saying, no. Tim Tszyu wasn't next in line. We come first. Our sanctioning body mandatory comes first. He's been in line since 2019. We got to fight. He's got to fight him next. We have something in contract. And this is the stuff that you have to make it become unsustainable. To defend to defend all 4 belts simultaneously. There's just too many obstacles in the way. Jermell is trying to do everything right. Still, this guy has done everything right. That's why I love Jermell. Like, Jermell beats the top guys in his weight class, becomes undisputed, does it in glorious fashion, knocks out the number 2 guy in his weight class. And then a month and a half after the fight's over, he says, I'm going to stick around and fight the young lion, Tim Tszyu, and defend all 4 belts. And instead of us getting that, I'll tell you what, the sanctioning bodies can mess up a wet dream. They're going to cock block that and try to give us some other mandatory that is not nearly as big. Undisputed just sounds good. It's like being an NBA team and being the champion in the East, West, North, South. Another good example. And I'm not saying that I don't value Undisputed. That's not what I'm saying either. I'm not saying that guys shouldn't go on for Undisputed, because I've been saying that they should. More guys should. All I'm saying is people are giving out mixed signals, from the fans to the sanctioning bodies to like I was saying with the fans. They say they want to see undisputed champions, and yet when they get undisputed champions, they still demean those champions. They do it in their rankings. They do it in how they talk. Sanctioning bodies get an undisputed champ in a weight class. And I'm sorry, my allergies are getting worse as I go on, so bear with me. But the sanctioning bodies say they want an undisputed champion, and then when they get it, they promote another guy as a champion in the same weight class where you have an undisputed champion. Network execs, they do the same thing. Networks do the same thing. Showtime did it with Tank Davis and Devin Haney. And the same thing with promoters and managers. They all do it. They devalue the undisputed system. And it's frustrating to watch. Wilder Joshua could have did it for like 2 years. That's right. And by the way, they were talking about Dead Zone. I appreciate what DAZN is doing right now. And listen, DAZN has the 2 biggest stars in boxing on their outfit, in Canelo Alvarez and Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk just got an $80 million site fee. And DAZN's putting on that fight. And you're going to call them Dead Zone? Doesn't fly. Props to Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk. And like I said, I would have rather seen an undisputed fight, but still a humongous fight out in Saudi Arabia. $80 million site fee. And I think that's going to be a great fight. Alexander Usyk put on a great performance in the first fight. I think he will do the same in the second fight, but it's going to be fun because I think Joshua is going to come out more aggressive in this fight. So not only is DAZN giving us value, meaningful fights, but it's also giving us entertainment value as well. And you're going to see that this weekend with Bam Rodriguez versus Sora Vise. And I'm going to be talking a lot about that card because I love that card. It's probably my favorite card so far this year. My favorite card in a while. And it's coming up this weekend. So a lot of talk about that card starting tomorrow on this channel. Let's see. We got Undisputed is good for boxing, creates underlying motivation for big fights to be made. I agree. Overall, I agree. I just wish that everybody would get on board and that Undisputed would take precedent over everything. Make it sustainable. Get rid of all those obstacles. And by the way, once you get one fight away from Undisputed, there should be a gentleman agreement in boxing that this takes precedent over everything. We got to get it done. Whether we got to cross promote, whether we got to kick this mandatory to the side, pay step aside money, whatever we got to do, let's get this Undisputed fight on. It should take precedent over everything. And the fact that it's not makes me think that people aren't being genuine with what they say. Spence Crawford would have no chance without Undisputed at stake. I agree. That's a great point. And that's where Undisputed brings value, right? We talked about Devin Haney earlier. Devin Haney brings more value to the table now that he's undisputed champion. In Canelo's case, Canelo's already undisputed at 168, and he's Canelo, so those belts don't bring him much value, whether he's undisputed or not. At this point, once he has already achieved that. But in this case right here, Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence, like Nando's saying, I don't think it's close to the finish line or on the 1 yard line if Undisputed is not involved. It's part of what makes Undisputed special, though, is how hard it is to do. At one point, it was pretty much impossible. Yep. And there's a reason that not too many guys were doing it. I wouldn't mind if only Undisputed Champion fights are scheduled for old-fashioned 15-round distance. Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see those 15-round fights again, though. I don't think we'll ever see that again. Speaking of Undisputed, I'm taking bets now that Spence beats and stops Crawford. Any takers, holler at your boy. Nothing all crazy and radical, but we can work. And Chauncey Pearls, I will have to talk to you because I think Crawford stops Spence. So we're going to have to talk about that as time goes on. I will definitely make a gentleman's bet with you on that. The only way Undisputed becomes really, really big if Undisputed Champ is allowed to remain undisputed for that long term. 12% off the top is a major disincentive for that. Yep. Lee Groves with another great comment. I agree. It has to be sustainable. It has to be sustainable. In life, like, it's hard to get to the top and then it's hard to sustain it. It's difficult to sustain it. It's difficult enough. So putting all kind of roadblocks in the way of something that's already difficult to do, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. It's like I was talking about with the pound for pound list. It's hard enough to get on the pound for pound list right now, but it's even more difficult to stay on it. You got to be doing great things right now to stay on that pound for pound list. So stop putting obstacles in these guys' way. They didn't go for it because it was too much to go through. It's hard to make these big fights. Yeah. It's the obstacles we keep talking about. Undisputed is great for the sport. It gets the best in the division fighting each other. The problem is the sanctioning fees are so expensive. The reason we have 82 games in 162, funding the ridiculous salaries of today's players, unless they start changing pay-per-view for charging pay-per-view for individual games, they can't reduce games. It's true. It's true. They opened up a Pandora's box that can't be closed now. This can't be closed. All about the money. And then they're going to they always put it on the purists, right? The purists won't like it if we go under 162. No. It's them. It's them. The purists would not mind it. The purists wouldn't care about the stats. The purists are like me. I'm an analytical guy. I'm on CompuBox all the time. I'm on BoxRec all the time. I'm on Caesar Sportsbook app all the time, looking at lines. I look at anything analytically. I love the numbers. I love looking at numbers. So guys who are analytical minded, it's easy for us to say, okay, 120 games instead of 162. All we have to do is shrink those numbers. All right. And then we have ways of comparing and contrasting, although the amount of games are different. But they want to put it on the purists. But it's them. It's money. Pretty much dumbed down-ish. Reminds me of the movie Idiocracy. Facts, casuals don't want all the BS. It has to be clear cut. And even then, it's still hard to keep their attention. Yep. It's hard to keep their attention. Good point. It takes a lot of money to run the business. It was a great point. With the system as it is now, we'll have to hold a fatal four-way for the Undisputed Championship. The champ versus his 3 mandatory challengers simultaneously, and put the ladder in the middle of the ring. I like the zone. People can hate on them, but what have all the other so-called leaders in the sport been doing in the last 2 decades to grow the sport? That's what I'm talking about, man. I've enjoyed the zone. I really don't understand. And maybe it's people who just like American boxing. But I enjoy turning on a UK card on Friday, which the zone will give me. They just give me these cards that I love, like these universal cards that I love. They'll give me a UK card on a Friday. They'll give me this card I'm getting on San Antonio Saturday night that is stacked to the gills, just stacked from top to bottom. And on top of that, they give me the biggest stars in the sport as well. And oh, by the way, they built up women's boxing as well. Women's boxing would not be where it's at today had the zone not subsidized some of these female boxing matches and put them on the undercards of bigger male boxing matches. The zone has been a leader in a lot of ways. I like the zone. People can hate on them, but we have all the other so-called leaders in the sport been doing in the last 2 decades to grow the sport. Chauncey Pearls, we will be talking, Chauncey. We will be talking because I like Crawford a lot in that fight. But I want to see if it's announced first. Believe me, I ain't going nowhere. But we're going to talk. Whether it's monetary, whether it's bragging rights, whatever you want to do, we can talk because I like Crawford bigly in that fight. And that's not to say I think Crawford runs through Spence. Not at all. That's going to be a barn burner of a fight. Spence is going to have moments early in that fight. Crawford is a notorious slow starter. Spence is going to take the fight to him early. I would not be surprised if Spence knocks Crawford down in the fight. But when Crawford gets it going, Chauncey, when he gets into killer mode, it gets ugly. That guy is a savage. I'm just telling you. You might want to rethink this. You might want to consider. I like the zone, ESPN Plus, and all the streaming services because the more boxing they put on, the better. I also love the trend of airing every fight on a given show. No dark matches. I agree. And I have all these streaming services. And although I've been critical of how ESPN has dragged on their cards and dragged, no flow to them, I actually thought their flow, I forgot to give him credit for this past Saturday night. The Joe Smith Jr. Better Be a fight started before 11 or around 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central. There was flow to that card. Only two. You had the lead up on ESPN Plus, and then you had, like you said, the lead up on ESPN Plus before. And they took that from UFC, right? Because UFC started doing this. They started showing the undercards before the pay-per-view, and they would be on, at the time, they would be on Fox, and then they would be on ESPN. And boxing is starting to do the same thing where they put the undercard, so you can see a Shushu Carrington on ESPN Plus, right? Because people need to see talent like that coming up. Because the ESPN Friday Night Fights is gone, which I hate. I hate that. I wish there would be more showbox cards. We used to get those fights. On Friday night. Every Friday night, we used to be able to see the guys like Shushu Carrington coming up. So it's important for ESPN Plus to have these fights on the undercard to where you're not getting dark matches to where only people who show up get to watch them. We get to watch them. We get to watch a talent like Shushu Carrington. And then we get to our 2 main event fights on the main card on ESPN. And I like that ESPN put 2 fights on ESPN at 9:00 my time, one fight, and then you had about a 20-minute break, and then they got straight to the main event. I thought ESPN did a great job of streamlining on Saturday night. Yeah, we'll do whatever. And I'm putting my foot down. I've always said that Spence beats Crawford. I appreciate your honesty, but I think you're wrong on this one. I heard October 29 for Crawford Spence. I hope it's true. There's a lot of rumors out there. And I dropped a video today on YouTube saying do not believe any of them. I don't believe any of the sources, any of the rumors coming out. I won't believe it until they actually come out and announce this fight, which I hope they do. Spence is a savage too. I'm not backing down. Spence is going to beat Crawford emphatically. I'm sticking to my guns, sending you a message. The zone gives us Mexican no names destroying English champs and contenders constantly. Hearn doesn't learn. Lara and JC Martinez are a few. Yeah. Another plus. Both Beterbiev and Smith said they wanted to do the shortest ring walks possible. No frills, no muss. Fighters can control the flow of a telecast, and they can demand fights be made. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I made this point in the past. Promoters, managers work for the fighters. They do. And a lot of times they get in the way of the fighters, but um, politics gets in the way. Better Biev is saying he wants to fight Bivol next. But then you have Bob Arum out there saying we already have a contract agreement with Yard in October. So it gets blurry as to what you want to believe. Does Better Biev really want this fight as much as he says? I believe Better Biev. So why is Bob Arum working against Better Biev in his wishes? If we take Better Biev at face value. But you're right. Fighters can demand and control their career. And as Nando said earlier, Crawford versus Spence wouldn't be on the 1 yard line if Undisputed wasn't involved. They'd have a reason to stay away from Crawford. But the reason Spence Crawford hasn't happened in the past, and maybe Chauncey won't like hearing this, is it's Spence, not Crawford. Crawford has always shouted from the mountaintops he wants that fight. Spence hasn't been as vocal about it. They've said things like you have to cross the street. Now, you can say Spence is just the fighter and Al Heyman is the promoter, manager, whatever you want to call him. And PBC is controlling Spence's career. But as my guy Lee Grove says here, fighters can demand the fights. Fighters can demand the fights. And that's why that interview that Tank Davis did a couple months ago, where they asked him, did you ever knock on the door and ask Floyd or Leonard or tell them demand these fights? And Tank just gave a blank look and he said no. And that told you everything you needed to know there. That Tank is not in control of his career. Fighters can control their career. They can demand fights. Joe Smith fought so dumb against Better Biev. He stood right in front of him and tried to trade. And I actually like how Joe Smith came out and tried to attack Better Biev early. He tried to attack him. That's what everybody said he needed to do. Better Biev, 37 years old, notorious slow starter, throws 30 punches per round the first 2 rounds on average. And then he steps up his output big time after that, big time. And he gets stronger by the numbers as the fight goes on. So I like that Joe Smith Jr. Stepped on the gas early and went after him. The problem is, like you said, he went straight after him. And Better Biev, that was right in Better Biev's wheelhouse. But that's all Joe Smith Jr. is capable of, right? He's not this great stylistic magician fighter. I remember $20 Warrior tickets before 2015. Now it's still $20. Oakland A's tickets, money, money, money. That's right. Hawker Mustang in the building. D Nice in the building. USA Tuesday Night Fights with Albert and Sean O'Grady. Good times. The Ruelas brothers and Riddick Bowe also featured. I remember watching Angel Man Freddy on USA Tuesday Night Fights as well. Those were great. That brings back great memories as well. I wish we had more stuff like that. I miss that level of fighting. And also James Toney used to fight on that, because James Toney was like the last like great full-time throwback fighter. Like James Toney used to win like a big fight, and then 2 months later he'd be back in the ring. And he'd fight on like USA Tuesday Night Fights. Does he want it though, Cal? He wants it. I'm telling you. He wants it. I'm telling you. I remember all that Bubblegum Kid O'Grady. That's right. Can we agree that Crawford has been hurt by less opponents than Spence? Before we go on, yes, we can. He's been hurt by less. True. Spence had a mental lapse against Ugas with the mouthpiece, but has Spence really been hurt before that fighting big welterweights? Here's what I'm going to tell you. Yes, we agree that Crawford has been hurt by less than Spence. Agreed. Gamboa early in the fight. Like I said, Crawford is a notorious slow starter. But do you really think that Spence is going to separate Crawford from his senses? Because that's what it's going to take to stop this guy, because he's not going to stop. Once this guy gets hurt, he turns into a different animal. And when he does, look out. Look out. I'm telling you. I understand Spence is tough. I understand Spence is a big welterweight. I understand that Spence is elite. I'm high on Spence as well. Spence is number 6 on my pound for pound list. But you know who's higher? Terrence Crawford. The reason Terrence Crawford is higher is because the eye test tells me he's a better fighter than Errol Spence in every way. I'm telling you, it's coming. Spence always said he would get all the PBC belts and fight Crawford for Undisputed. The man had a plan. How is that ducking? I'm not saying he's ducking. All I'm saying is he could have made that fight earlier. You just said he wanted to get those PBC belts before he fought Crawford. The boxing fans wanted to see Crawford before the PBC belts. The demand was for Crawford before the PBC belts. And Spence gave us the opposite. Spence and his team were saying you have to cross the street. That's all I'm saying. And by the way, I'm not fully absolving Terrence Crawford in this situation because Terrence Crawford could have left Top Rank before. He could have left Top Rank before he signed a multi-fight deal again with Top Rank. And the reason he did that is because he got comfortable getting guaranteed money and sitting back and getting that guaranteed money that Top Rank was giving him. And Top Rank was saying they were losing money on him every fight. All right. All I'm saying, man, is there was a guy who wanted to fight. There was a guy who didn't. I'm not fully absolving Terrence Crawford in this situation because he could have made it easier for himself and became a free agent and made the big fights easier for him to get at 147. He could have made better business decisions, but he didn't. All right. But Errol Spence still could have fought him. He could have went the Crawford route, then PBC belts, but instead he went PBC belts, then Crawford. It may end up working out for him, right? He may become undisputed at 147, and this whole thing works out for him great. He may be the man with this master plan. But I don't know. Oh, we're gonna bet. We're gonna bet. Shout out my guy D-Style Boxing in the building. We are gonna bet. Chauncey Pearls. We're going to bet. And that's anybody else as well. If you want to bet Errol Spence over Terrence Crawford, I'm taking bets. Joe Smith tried to fight the right way, but the fight was lost the moment Beterbiev landed the first right to the temple, and when that first punch registered visibly with Smith, then it went downhill. Beterbiev showed that he can fight off the front foot, and those 2 uppercuts he landed to end the fight were off the back foot. When Beterbiev landed that first shot and he decided, I'm stepping on the gas here. I'm putting on a great performance. I'm going to take this guy out early. The fight was over. There was nothing Joe Smith Jr. could have done. And I'm now of the thinking, I know Zerto's good. I know Canelo's still tough at 175, but I think he needs to stay at 168. And the reason being, the only guy who can beat Bivol is Beterbiev. The only guy who can beat Beterbiev is Bivol. That's it. That's it. And what a great fight that would be. One of the best pure fights that could be made in boxing. PBC left Crawford till last to age him. You're a smart guy, Steven. You're a smart guy. Yep. Tuesday night fights when Bo kicked his opponent and his manager, Rock Newman, pulled him over the ropes. I love Tuesday night fights. I miss those, man. I miss Tuesday night fights. I miss Friday night fights on ESPN Boxing. Teddy Atlas yelling at judges. Teddy Atlas yelling at everybody. Teddy Atlas giving his breakdown before the fights. I miss those days, man. I miss those days. You had guys like Alan Green being brought up through ESPN Friday Night Fights, fighting every 3 to 4 months before they graduated to either Showtime or HBO. I miss that. It was clear. It was concise. We knew where to get. We knew what level we were getting at ESPN Friday Night Fights. We knew what level we were getting HBO Showtime. We know what level we were getting HBO Boxing After Dark. And man, I miss HBO badly now. We knew what level we were getting at Showbox. It's all kind of cloudy now with things kind of everywhere. The only thing I would say, Crawford's downfall will be his lack of dope opposition, because until this point, Crawford is 30-plus-year-old eye test. Yeah. Spence has the better opposition on his resume for sure. Now, Crawford has the better achievement in becoming undisputed at 140. Errol Spence has not done that, right? This is the third weight class that Terrence Crawford has competed in, and he's already eyeing a fourth weight class. So it depends on what you value. All I'm saying, man, is head to head, this is going to be a battle. This is going to be a welterweight fight for the ages. And ultimately, you're not going to beat Terrence Crawford. You're not going to beat Terrence Crawford at the end of the day. It may be in the 9th round. It might be in the 10th round. It may even go to decision. You're not going to beat Terrence Crawford at the end of the day. This guy is the real life boogeyman. He is a killer. I'm telling you. Aside from Ugas and Porter, what are the big names on Spence's record? Spence had, and I could go over, I've gone over Spence's resume before, but Spence has a strong 147-pound resume. He does. He does. He has meaningful wins at 147. And if he caps that off by beating Terrence Crawford, you can make a strong argument that he's the pound-for-pound champ, even though he's only fought in one weight class. Because that beating Terrence Crawford, who has a bigger win than that recently? Anybody? Like, I mean, is the winner of Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. the pound-for-pound king? You can make a strong argument for it. Boxing fans are slow. Crawford will finally be in there with the real dog, just like he is. In this case, is going to be the bigger, more natural welterweight that has been all his career and stop Bud. Bud's a strong dude. That's all I'm gonna tell you. Wrestling background. I witnessed him on video a couple months ago walk into a weight room, deadlift 450 in street clothes with ease. I'm telling you, he's strong. It's a strong dude. He's compact. You're not going to wrestle that guy around. How did Mikey and Danny fit into Spence's plan? Yeah, good point. Good point. Now I'm reminiscing Monday Night Boxing at the Fabulous Forum with Chick Hearn. That's before my time. Crawford only has 5 fights at 147. Boxing fans don't know anything about historic fights. Crawford might have stayed with Top Rank as long as he did because that was the only way his dream fight with Pacquiao could be made. Bob was never going to let that happen, but that's my thought. Now I remember those conversations as well. Why that fight wasn't happening. Why did Bud stick around with Top Rank if Bob is not going to deliver him the Manny Pacquiao fight? And by the way, Errol Spence Jr. missed out on that because had that eye injury not happened, he would have done to Pacquiao what Ugas did to Pacquiao. Probably worse, likely worse. But Terrence Crawford never got delivered that Manny Pacquiao fight either. Sticking around at Top Rank. Bivol versus Better Biev. Yes, that's the fight that I want to see at 175. Can you ask these guys how Mikey and Danny fit into strap season? I don't know, man. Like, I'm asking, not getting any answers. Spence could have fought Crawford by now. The fight could have happened by now. That's all I need to say. Don't forget the last landed punch was the back of Smith's head. And there's a lot of talk about that, right? But my thing with that is, and you saw it in the fight prior to that, guys give up the back of their head. Like they lean down, and I think they do it purposely because they know that there's nothing for the opponent to hit. And then they come in with the head. And that's the frustrating part. And I've heard Malignaggi talk about this on broadcast. He's the only person who concisely says this and breaks this down, is guys come in there with their head like that. There's nothing for you to punch, and there's nothing for you to do except hold their head down or punch the back of the head. And then when you get warned for rabbit punching, it's a frustrating thing to deal with because you should be warning the guy for coming in with his head down. I don't think Spence Crawford will be as competitive as people think. Spence will dominate. He's too big for Crawford. Man, I'm telling you what. I hope we can get some gentlemen's bets on this because I think I'm gonna make a good bit of money on this fight because it's even odds right now. It is even odds. Spence was actually the slight favorite, and now it's even odds. And when this fight is announced, if it's still even odds or even close to it, I'm jumping all over Terrence Crawford, um, even odds, and I'll take on bets, Cash App, Venmo, whatever y'all want to do, gentlemen's bets, whatever y'all want to do, because I'm telling you, Crawford's going to win this fight. And this is with all due respect to Errol Spence. Love Errol Spence. I'm a fan. I'm one of the few people, it seems, who's a fan of both fighters. Think highly of both fighters. I'm just telling you, I don't see anybody beating Terrence Crawford. Just don't. I think the guy is built differently. If you really think about it, Spence hasn't never really reached his prime. He always had something going on, like the car crash, his eye, etc. But I got Crawford. I thought that, and I got pushback on this after the fight. I thought Spence, that was one of his best performances against Ugas. I thought he looked brilliant. I thought how, and I think it's because I think higher of Ugas than other people. Ugas was a clear number 3 in the weight class at the time. And Spence beat him up. Like Spence came in, went right at him, took his legs away with the body punching early, took away his lateral movement, took away his legs, and then went back upstairs as well to finish off the job. He put a beating on Ugas. And yes, Ugas worked his way back in the fight. Ugas hurt him as well. But I thought that was a great performance by Spence. And I think both of those guys, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. Sometimes things don't happen when you want them to happen, but they happen at the right time. And Spence Crawford may be happening at the perfect time. Undisputed, all the belts involved. And they're both coming off of arguably career best performances. Crawford against Porter and Spence against Ugas. 2 meaningful wins in the weight class. So let me get to a couple more real quick because my allergies are killing me right now. My voice is run out. Went to the UK and dethroned a very dangerous Kell Brook. That's another one they sleep on. Here's a mind blower. Who's got more meaningful victories on their resume, Loma or Spence? You know what, Nando? We're gonna do a different. We're gonna do a whole episode on something like that because I can dive deep into those 2 resumes. And like with Loma, you can throw out, he's done it throughout 3 weight classes. Spence has done it in 1. Errol Spence Jr., they both consolidated numerous belts, right? Loma at 135, Spence at 147. I'm trying to think my way through this, but it's an interesting debate. Off the top of my head, I would say Loma. What would you say, Nando? I think Usyk's first win over AJ was a huge win. Winning 3 heavyweight belts in AJ's home country as a former undisputed cruiserweight champ is legacy establishing. And Usyk consolidating 7 of the 8 belts in the 2 weight classes he's performed in under 20 fights is one of the great achievements in modern boxing. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Crawford only stayed at top rank because of those 5 million minimums, which no one seems in a hurry to match. That's the deal that he structured, and he was happy with that. He was happy with that. And Crawford can call out this guy, but he signed a deal, $5 million minimums, and he stuck with top rank. It is what it is. Calix, check your DM. I sent you the contract. Spence will handle Bud. All right, I got another one. Roping them in. I'm telling you, I hope y'all stick around. And we're going to have to get in touch with each other and get some bets because I'm telling you, Crawford's going to win this fight. Sign the contract. Oh, the contract signed. How do boxing fans get in the way of historic events as the fans who are screaming for the big fights? That's right. Um, Loma by far, in my humble opinion. I would agree with that. I don't know if by far, but and the gap seems to be closing. You know what? I'm gonna do a separate video on that because I don't want to lose my train of thought. But the Ugas fight is the fight that solidified my KO pick for Crawford against Spence. And I know exactly what you're thinking. The mouthpiece incident. And if Crawford would have been in that same scenario, he would have finished the job there. Likely. Don't blame your allergies when Bud loses and you sobbing. All right, let's see. Who is Crawford with now? Hearn wasn't trying to sign him. Crawford is with nobody right now. Nobody. Promotional free agent, which makes it easy to negotiate. I mean, this is what everybody's been waiting for, right? There's been talks of crossing the street. Now he's crossed the street. Now he's in the middle of the street yelling, let's deal. Let's deal. You want the fight? Let's get it done. It seems to be trying to fit a square peg in a circle hole, getting the money to work for these fights because there's talks of this not being a casual type of fight. It's a pure boxing fans fight, and the pay-per-view numbers might not be there to pay these guys. But regardless, they got to get it done. They got to get it done. 50 on Errol Easy Money. I will bet you that 50. I will bet you that 50. So I'm gonna write this down. Like I got bets with Chauncey, with RM. I'm writing it down now. I forgot who else I got a bet with on here. But we're gonna have to talk as time goes on. We gotta wait for the fight to actually get signed first. We gotta wait. I think Crawford's a free agent at this moment, and he is. He is. So on that note, man, I'm going take some NyQuil or something because the allergies are killing me. Back in the day, Sugar Ray Leonard incorporated himself and offered his service to the highest bidder. Interesting that more fighters haven't gone this route, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, and that's what Devin Haney right now is in a good position because once this 4-fight deal with Top Rank ends, he'll be in a position to do something similar at, say, 24 years old. Right? If he comes out of that 4-0, is what I'm saying. Because there's a good chance he could lose one of those fights. If he fights Kambosos again, I think he wins that fight. But once you start talking about a possible Lomachenko fight, or if Shakur Stevenson moves up to 135, there's chances of him losing. But if he comes out of that 4-0, he's got a lot of leverage as a 24-year-old undisputed promotional free agent. I'm going to be here, Calix. I ain't going anywhere. I just hope this gets signed. Oh, it's getting signed. On that note, man, good night. Thanks for tuning in. See y'all tomorrow. God bless.